This is called Layers of Squares, a 12-inch finished block. Here is the diagram, and we're going to do a square on point in the center. We're going to do 2 sets of flying geese and lots of half square triangles and some squares in the corner. Here are 4 blocks set block to block, and this block is a 6x6 grid. So for a 12-inch block, each of the squares in this grid will finish at 2 inches. Let's take a look at the patches. Patch A is a 2-inch finished square. We'll cut 2.5-inch squares, and we'll need 4 patches. That's 1 in each of the outside corners. Here are all of the AccuQuilt dies you can use for all of these patches. Patch B is a 2-inch finished half square triangle. We'll cut 2 7/8-inch squares, cut them in half once on the diagonal, and we'll get 2 patches. Now I've started adding on here. You can either cut your patches, which is this one piece here, or you can sew the half square triangles and the flying geese using 1 square. So for the red fabric, you'll need 16 patches. That is 16 of these triangle pieces, or 8 of the squares. So you'll cut 2 7/8-inch squares, and you will not subcut them. You'll just need the 8 squares. For the background fabric, you'll need 20 patches, or 10 squares. And for the green fabric, you'll need 4 patches, or 2 squares. And for the black fabric, you'll need 4 patches. This is for the square on point, so we'll need to have the triangles to stitch to each side of that square. Patch C is a 1/4 square triangle, 4-inch finished, and we cut the squares 5 1/4 inches. Then we cut them in half twice on the diagonal, and we'll get 4 patches. That's what we need for the background, and that's also what we need for the blue fabric. Now these are for the flying geese, for the 2 different sets of flying geese. So if you're going to use the 4 at a time method to make flying geese, you'll need 1 square at 5 1/4 inches for the background, and the same for this blue fabric. And we do not subcut these, we keep them as squares. And the last patch is patch D. It's the 4-inch finished square on point. It's the square in the middle. We'll cut it 3 3/8-inch squares, and we need 1. How we're going to piece this is we'll start in the center and stitch the square in a square unit. Then we'll use either method to stitch the flying geese units, and we have 2 sets of 4 flying geese. You can just stitch all of your patches together, or we can use the 4 at a time flying geese, and I'll have a demo of that. And then finally we'll make the remaining half square triangles and put the block together. Here are the fabrics I've chosen. This is the background fabric, and these are the squares that go in each outside corner. These are for the square on point, the half square triangles, patch B, and I've used the deluxe corner clipper from Marty Michelle to clip these points for piecing. These are all patch B's here. These have just been subcut. These are squares, and we're going to use all of these to make the half square triangles and the 4 at a time flying geese. Here is patch C, and these are the large squares for the flying geese, 4 at a time, and this is the square on point. So let's start with the square on point. This is the square on point, and these are the triangles that go here, and I've cut off the points to help me piece this. And this is what the unit will look like. And I start with opposite sides, and we just place the fabric here, and then we're going to stitch 1/4 inch here, and then do the same thing to this side and 1/4 inch. Then we'll press and then stitch these 2 the same way. The next short segment will show you how to piece this square on point if you have rotary cut pieces that are not trimmed on the points, and it'll also show you how to stitch the square on point with the AccuQuilt cut pieces. You have your 4 half square triangles that go on the corners, and your large square in the center that's set on point. I like to start by piecing opposite sides first. And what I do is flip this over, center the square on the triangle, matching these edges, the long edge of the triangle and one side of the square. You want to see if these triangles over here on the right and here on the left are roughly the same size. You just kind of eyeball it. So there, I'm going to go with that. Stitch 1/4 inch from this edge, a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way down. Do this side as well. Press your seams open, and if you look, these edges extend here, and what I'm going to do now is just trim these off straight in line with the side of the square. Put your half square triangle down with the right side facing up, and then place this in the center, and then check the size of your triangles overhanging here. And what you're going to do here, you will start stitching right here in this V section where this point meets. And this should be a 1/4 inch from here to the edge of this fabric. Start here, stitch 1/4 inch all the way to this side, and you should come out here at the same part on this side. And do that on both sides. And here's what the stitching looks like. And now you're going to press your seams open. And here's the finished unit. Now just trim off these little nubs on the sides. And your unit's finished. Piecing the square on point using AccuQuilt. I like to start by piecing opposite sides first. And you're going to place the half square triangle piece on top. We need to center it. I just kind of eyeball it, and I'm looking at this little triangle of the bottom fabric poking out here. You can barely see it. It's a little triangle poking out here, and then on the other side there's a little triangle poking out here. What you want to do is try to get them as close to the same size as possible. So I'm just kind of shifting it a little bit. And you're going to take it to your machine, and your 1/4 inch should be right here at this point. So you stitch from this point a 1/4 inch all the way down, and you come off at this point. And it's more important that you have the 1/4 inch than if you're exactly on the point. And you'll do that for both sides, this side and then this opposite side. Press your seams open. Now we'll flip it over and do the other two sides. You take your triangle, and now you have sides that you can match. You see the triangle has the points cut off. These points are going to line up with what we just sewed. So if you look here, you see they line up with this edge, these two edges, here, here, and across the top. Now you'll stitch a 1/4 inch from that point here all the way down to this other point, and do that to both sides. It's really difficult to see this stitching because I used white thread, but you can see it coming out here, this little tag here and over here. If these don't match perfectly, if it's like it's not long enough, don't stretch this triangle because you'll just make the unit wonky. Just center it as much as you can and stitch a 1/4 inch. Now we'll just press it open and it will be finished. And there's your For the flying geese 4 at a time, these are our large squares, and we need the small squares that go with them. So we'll put 4 of the background squares with this one, and then we'll have 4 squares to go with this one. So now here's a short clip showing you how to do flying geese 4 at a time. Now for the flying geese 4 at a time, you're going to cut 1 large square, and this will be the geese. That's the triangle in the center. And you'll cut 4 small squares, and this is the sky. It's the 2 triangles on the outside of the flying geese unit. And again, a chart for the sizes to cut these is in the description after the video. You'll take the small squares the sky and mark one diagonal line on each one. Then you're going to take two squares and line up the corner of the large square and then the opposite corner of the large square. So you make sure that the edges are even and this diagonal line lines up. And you're going to stitch 1/4 of an inch on either side of the diagonal line. Now you're going to cut on the diagonal line that you drew. And you're going to press these toward the dark side, the darker fabric, which in this case is this direction, and then cut off the nubs. Now here we have the two pieces. They're pressed to the dark side and the nubs have been taken off. Now you're going to take your remaining triangles, line up this edge like this, and line up the same thing over here. And you're going to stitch, you know the drill, 1/4 inch on each side of the diagonal line on each one. Now once you've stitched, you're going to cut it in half on the diagonal line that you drew. And I wanted to show you this closer. If you can see where this line of stitching meets the edge, this little intersection here of the top fabric and the bottom fabric, your stitching should be right at that point on both sides. Now we've finished our square on point, and it's all pressed, the seams are pressed open, and we finished our 2 sets of flying geese. 4 at a time, trimmed off all the nubs. Let's set these to the side. Now we're going to take the remaining bee patches. You should have 6 of the background, 4 of one, and 2 of another. And we're going to make these half square triangles 2 at a time. You're going to take each of the light fabrics and mark a diagonal line on the back side. Then you're going to pair it together with one of the accent fabrics, and you're going to stitch 1/4 of an inch on either side of this line. This is just like if you had in this step here where you took the 2 7/8 inch square and you cut it in half on the diagonal. This is what you're basically doing here. You've got your diagonal. You're going to stitch 1/4 of an inch here and 1/4 of an inch here. And this is what it looks like. It's 1/4 of an inch on each side. Then we're going to cut along this diagonal line. I'll just take my scissors and cut along the line. And then when you open it up, you have your finished half square triangle. Press the seams open and you'll cut off the nubs. Here's what they look like after they're sewn. Here's the nubs, and you cut the nubs off and you have this. So you should have 4 of the green half square triangles when you're finished with this, and 8 of the red half square triangles. All the half square triangles have been finished and all the nubs are trimmed. And we're going to put the half square triangles together with the A patch square that goes in the corner. We're going to make the corner units, and we'll lay them out like this and piece them together. And here is what they look like pieced together. To piece the side units, we'll take our 2 flying geese and sew them together like this and press the seams open. And when all that's finished, you'll have your center unit, you'll have your 4 side units and your 4 corner units, and then we'll put the block together. Our center unit, corner units, and side units are done, and now we'll just follow the diagram and put the block together. I'll start with the corner unit, and the square goes to the outside. And then we'll fill in with the side units, and the blue goose is pointing toward the outside. And so here are your layers of squares. This is one square where with the green half square triangles make a square. And then here's another square where the blue geese units make a square, and then your outside large square. Now we'll just sew the units into rows, 3 rows, and then we'll sew the rows together and the block will be finished. Here's the finished block, and virtually every seam you sew as you're sewing the units into rows and the rows together, you have 2 places to match these points. So here, all of these star points, here, everywhere. All these points have to match. If you want to know how I match these, then stay tuned after I show you the block. There'll be a short clip I made from a video called Color Junction, and it shows how to match these points. There will also be a link in the description and just up above here on the upper right, a link to that video. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned if you want to see the points. You're going to match each of these points. You're first going to match the black seams here, and so just match those together and then along the sides here, and we'll just put a pin there. Now to match these points, you're going to go, if you see the stitching goes this way and then this way, so where the stitching intersects, makes that little V, you're going to put your pin in there in the top one. Then pick that up and look for the same area on the bottom one. This is going to be hard to see because here is the seam where it's pressed on this triangle, and then I'm going to put the pin right at the very tip of the triangle. And then what you want to do is put them together, and you want to look at the pin and make sure it's perpendicular. That means coming straight out of the fabric. If the pin is like this and it's going angled like that, it's not right. Your points won't meet. So you want it to be perfectly straight like this. Then you turn it and put the pin in. Do the same thing all the way down. So you're going to match this top point of the triangle, and you can see there where it's matched, where the 3 pieces come together, and then find the same place right here and match them together. And now let me find a place that has different color fabrics. Here's a good one right here. So here you see the point where the 2 meet right there, and you can see that the distance between this point and the edge of the fabric is not 1/4 inch. It's less than that. But as long as we match these points up, it'll be fine if we pay attention. So here you have some different fabrics, and here again is where the point meets, and you see that this distance here is not really 1/4 inch. And so just make sure that your pin is perpendicular and put it in. And you're going to do that down the whole side. Now to sew this together, you're going to start here, use your 1/4 inch foot. And I don't like to stitch over pins, but if you stitch over pins, you can go ahead. But I just I take this pin out first, and I put this in the machine and start at 1/4 inch. And then what I do is I'm aiming for this next pin, and where this pin goes into the fabric, that's what I'm aiming for. And if it's 1/4 inch, that's great. If it's less than, a little bit more than 1/4 inch, I don't worry about it. So when I get to this point, I take the pin out and then stitch right where that pin went into the fabric. And then once you pass this part, you aim for the next one. So where the next pin goes into the fabric. So you're stitching from pin to pin each time. And most of the time it's going to be pretty good, but sometimes you'll have a small, like this one here that we ran into, where this is not 1/4 inch, but if I just concentrate on going from pin to pin, of course this one's not pinned, but from this part down to this part, then we'll get a straight line there, and it should be okay.